Okay, then we might as well begin the third session of our student lecture series. And this time we talk about, the second time about narrative mediums. And this time we talk about text, music, and film. As you can see, it's the third lecture in the series, and the theme is what I just said. We'll talk about what I also just said, so I can also skip this. And then we'll start off by talking about texts at the exam, or using the example of jokes. And to start this theme off, I looked for funny bits I found on the internet, and I chose a skit from Bo Burnham, and I'm just going to show you the skit now and then kind of talk about it and tell you what I thought was interesting about the skit.
Have you ever felt sad or lonely? Have you ever felt 2 feet tall? Have you ever thought, man, if only I was anybody else at all? They like to kick you when times get rough, and you give your all, but it's not enough, and sticks and stones might break your bones, but words can break your heart. But if you don't know where to go, I'll show you where to start. Kill yourself. It'll only take a minute, and you'll be happy that you did it. Just go over to your oven and shove your head in it.
Okay, so this is skit. And you can see that there's this build-up moment where the topic of the skit will be introduced. So he talks about how feelings can be hurt by words, and it all ties in with him playing the piano, and this whole soothing mood is set. And then he hits you with the punchline being that you should kill yourself if you experience some kind of problem like this. And the funny thing about this, and where it ties in with how texts work, is obviously that a text also works the same way. So when you decipher a text or you work with a text, you're kind of working like a detective. So you have a lot of clues that you put together, and you try to anticipate what happens next. So when you're reading, I don't know, a detective novel, to stay in this kind of simile, you have clues, and then you try to anticipate who the culprit is or who the villain is. And the text is supposed to give you information so that you can anticipate what's going to happen next. So for example, if you read a detective novel, you also want to know at the end who did it and how, and also all these other questions that need to be answered. And third, your reading experience, you will anticipate at many moments who was it, who did it, etc. And the jokes, or jokes in general, work the same way. So you anticipate where the comedian is going with his build-up, with his introduction to a topic, with everything he says. But then he still surprises you if it's a good comedian with his punchline and makes you laugh. So if we jump into the skit again and look at it again from another angle, we'll see new information about how texts work. So here again, we jump into the skit.
Kill yourself. Really, you should do it. There's really nothing to it. Just grab a mug and chug a cup of lighter fluid. Okay, now I feel like you pulled back. Maybe it's on account of the fact that I'm telling you to kill yourself over and over again. I'm just trying to make a simple point that life's toughest problems don't have simple answers. You shouldn't just be brave. You shouldn't just roar. You shouldn't kill yourself. But I understand that it's a sensitive subject, and you're probably just hearing me say that. And I've dealt with, I don't want to be.
Okay, so here he jumps out of this comedic persona and talks about his own mode of narration that he just used before. So he says, obviously, you shouldn't kill yourself. But on the other hand, what he also says is basically that you shouldn't look to a song to tell you what to do in a way, that life's problems don't have as simple an answer as to be found in a song. What I also noted while watching the video and found quite interesting is that he repeats this kill yourself with a lot of examples, thus vivifying the message, but also giving you like hands-on ideas of how to kill yourself, which makes it rather funny if you think about that he's just kidding with this message, which becomes even more clear as he goes on now. He already quoted at this point, "You shouldn't just roar," which is obviously a Katy Perry reference. In a song, she says that if you have a problem, you should just roar and everything will be fine again. And that is obviously not the case he's making. It's obvious that just roaring won't help you in any way. You should probably take the problem seriously and think about it and not look to songs to solve it. I think it's extremely ironic that he's giving you this message as the premise of his own song. Yeah, so now...
Look, I sound unempathetic, I sound mean and rude. Suicide is an epidemic, and I don't want to be misconstrued. Signs of depression go overlooked. So if you're depressed, then you need to book a therapy session. Talk about your depression and let a professional hear it. But if you search for moral wisdom in Katy Perry's lyrics, then kill yourself. It won't be painful if you are able to give a little kiss to an oncoming train. You'll kill yourself. It's over, mullet. There's a trigger, pull it. Get it through your head, it being a bullet.
So here we have again where he jumps into this serious persona and talks about how depression is actually a problem, and yeah, tells you that if you have depression, you should probably just see a doctor, a psychiatrist who's going to help you, and that, as I said before, Katy Perry is not going to solve your problem for you. But then he builds up this anticipation again of him being all serious about the topic and giving you good life advice, just to jump into this punchline again of just advising you to kill yourself if you actually look into Katy Perry's lyrics for advice, which is kind of interesting because it turns the punchline from the first part that was just generically thrown at you that you should kill yourself into a new perspective, and you know, it kind of just puts it into the context of if you look into Katy Perry's songs for life advice or anything, then you should kill yourself. You shouldn't just generally kill yourself, but just if you do this. And of course he's kidding, he's a comedian, he won't just advise you to kill yourself or anything. But I think this is a rather good example of how you can work with anticipation of the audience to have a certain effect. And the effect in the video was obviously that people were laughing. And I think even more when he said the kill yourself part the second time, because he introduced it once and then got all serious about the topic, but then used the same phrase, the same punchline again. And people didn't seem to expect that, which is a comedic device that is often used in contemporary comedic shows. All right, then we go on and talk about texts in general, but still obviously in connection to jokes, insofar as jokes work the same way as texts. And I've already said that jokes play with the anticipation of the audience, but texts do that the same way. And then you also have this dimensional self-referentiality, which was also in the video when he talks about how he or the things he says are perceived by the audience. So he references the audience view of himself, but also he references real life problems in a comedic song, which can at some points be rather strange for the audience when you get pulled into the narrative and then reality hits you again, because you obviously expect some kind of jokes, but then if someone gets all serious like he does in the middle of the song, you get pulled back into reality and out of this comedic zone of comfort and laughter and everything. And yeah, we also have layering of meaning. That was what I meant when I talked about when he first uses the punchline, kill yourself, it's just more general. But then as the song goes on, the same punchline is used again, but only in reference to people who look at Katy Perry songs for life advice. So what I also find interesting to note is that levels of irony are often in texts, also sarcasm, etc. these kind of modes of narration or modes of storytelling. But also in comedy, you have obviously kind of sarcastic or ironic uses of language. And I also think that him being all serious in the middle of the song is kind of ironic if you think about the punchline at the end. But also the fact that he uses a song to speak about the fact that you shouldn't look to songs for life advice is extremely ironic. Yeah. And then you have the reinforcement of the message through playful but meaningful arrangement of words. So you have a certain structure. So at the beginning you have this introduction of information, introduction of the topic itself. Then you have this ironic middle bit after the punchline where he's all serious about the topic to just break into the punchline again. And you also have these bits and pieces of repetition where he talks about suicide or killing yourself in rather more extreme and more realistic terms, and not only giving you this command, but actually giving you ways on how to kill yourself. All right, and then we want to talk about the formative effort in text in general, because that is kind of what holds this whole lecture together. And we've kind of agreed on the fact that the formative effort, if you only think about texts now, and we leave this comparison to jokes and comedic skits, the formative effort of texts is really big, because you actually have to think about everything that you're reading. You have to imagine it, you have to put faces to the people you're reading about, you have to think about the places. If, for example, I tell you the story, I was strolling through the streets, probably everyone in this room has a different street in mind, because that's just how our minds work. So maybe some of you thought about the Hauptstraße here in Heidelberg, but maybe others thought about their home street or the street they liked most, or the one time they were in Paris and they really liked the street. So yeah, this formative effort is important because in the other mediums we also want to talk about this. For example, in music, the formative effort is also quite high, because you only have this unarticulated noise that is thrown at you, that is obviously arranged in a meaningful way, but you have to put your own pictures and you have to put your own thoughts into it to make sense of what is thrown at you. In movies, obviously, that is quite different. I mean, we have seen in the skit that you have real people with real faces moving in a certain way. You can read their body language, etc. It's quite a lot easier than a text that you have to read. All right, then we move on to narration in music, and don't worry, the next bits where you will only have to listen to something and not do anything has arrived. But before that, the first advice to how you work or decipher music pieces is to just listen to the piece and savor the first impression you get. We kind of had this last time too, when I talked about how to decipher the narrative of a painting or a picture. Just savor the first impression you get. Try to think of what the picture makes you think of, and in this case, obviously, what the music makes you think of the first time you hear it. Okay, that didn't work, okay. Okay, I guess the thunderstorm and rainstorm outside is quite fitting to the piece. And step two is obviously you look at the music more closely, and that can happen on different levels of analysis. And I'll just run you through different levels you can use if you look at a music score. The most obvious and kind of, I think, the most important is that of where actually are we in a piece. If we talk about a bigger music piece, which the Requiem by Mozart obviously is, we have to look at the big picture and where exactly in the piece we are. So right now, the sequence you just heard comes from the Dies Irae parts at the beginning of the sequence. And it's quite interesting to note that it is the third sequence, or the third part, the third bigger part of the Requiem itself. That means that the introduction has happened. We have moved on to the point that we can really talk about something in a way. This is where in jokes, I guess, normally the punchline would happen and then it moves on using this punchline again. So here we have a place where punch can really hit you. And interesting to note at this point too is that different requiems have a different structure, not entirely different, but in certain facets of the arrangement of which texts were used, which bits and pieces of the original Mass, being the Mass for the dead in the church, were used for the music piece. If you compare, for example, Mozart's Requiem and the Requiem by Verdi, you can see that they both use different pieces of the source material, which is the Mass in the church. Mozart himself stayed quite true to the source material in the way that he runs through all the steps, so that you could actually kind of play this at church if you had all the musicians and the capacities to do that, and you could still hold the sermon for the dead. In the case of Verdi, that is quite different. He wrote a Requiem that was planned to not be played in a church, but only as a piece that is played for enjoyment, or I guess, if that's what you're going for. Then another thing that is quite interesting to note, if I run you top to bottom now, is of course the tempo of the piece. And the tempo here is allegro assai, which means pretty fast. I mean, you heard it, it is pretty fast, it is pretty vivid, it is very in your face. But that also comes from the fact that it is very loud, so the dynamic is forte, which means that it's quite loud. At this point, you can also start thinking about which instruments are used in what way and why. So, I mean, the instruments are written on the sides. I could run you through them, but that is quite useless at this point. So if we move on, we can also subdivide the different instruments into groups that play kind of alike, which, if you go even deeper into analysis, brings you to this kind of structure. So you have a static kind of background noise that is fighting with the more dynamic kind of chaotic overlay on top of that static background sound. An interesting thing to note is that the static and dynamic is not divided by instruments, but divided through who plays when, and some instruments are more static at certain points, but more dynamic at other points. And then obviously, which is quite important for the undertaking of deciphering a Requiem, something that is based on a text, something that is based on a text that has been used in church for a really long time, is obviously to look at the text. So in this case, we have this sermon text, and translated into English, we have a description of the judgment day, basically. So the apocalypse comes down and people basically die, and then they ascend to heaven, and then they will be judged. So that is what this piece is basically about, or this part of the Requiem. And yeah, we can see this through the text, but also if you think about everything that I've so fastly run you through, it kind of fits with the other pieces. So we have really loud instruments, we have a quite fast tempo, And then we have this impending doom and the day of wrath that is going to haunt humanity for its last day. And then in the later parts of the Requiem, we obviously have the ascension to heaven and the judgment of God. And then if everything works quite well for you or for us, we go into heaven. All right. So what I've come across quite often when people try to think about or try to come up with an interpretation of a music piece is that they just listen to the music and try to find an answer, which I find quite stupid, because if you look at an art piece, we had that last time, you want to use as many contextual information as you can get your hands on. So for the music piece, that is quite the same. You try to get your hands on as much information as you can get. You look at the piece itself, you listen to it, then you look at the author, you look at what time the piece was written, what was quite fashionable to do as a musician at the time, and then you get all this information and you need to filter it, and you need to ask yourself why the composer chose to do something that way, why the artist chose to do something that way, etc. Yeah. Another fun fact that I wanted to share with you while talking about the Requiem, because it fits so perfectly, is that music can have another layer of analysis. For example, this Dies Irae by Mozart, or the Dies Irae in general, in its form of a hymn, has a structure, a musical structure that has become symbolic for death. So you have the Dies Irae melody, which I just played for you, so you still have it in your heads, I hope, has become symbolic for death and has been used in other music pieces. For example, the Isle of the Dead by Rachmaninoff uses the Dies Irae as a background layer at certain points to hint at death. And also Gustav Mahler has used this symbolic unit to hint at death in certain pieces and at certain points in his pieces. But you can also see this in more...
Do you mean that the Dies Irae is some sort of music or notes that are always the same, a melody that is always the same, that is used by different composers? Or what do you mean by that?
So the arrangement of Dies Irae basically follows the way you say it. So in the prayer itself, it is written as kind of a poem. So you read it out as a trochee kind of dynamic. And that is, you have Dies Irae, and then you have this movement of up and down. I could actually get out a picture. I don't have it in my presentation, but there is like this fixed pattern of how it was sung in the old day, and that has been kind of imprinted into music. So every time a Dies Irae is played, they play it kind of like this pattern that has been used in the old days to sing. I think it's 14th century where they first started to write down how they sing the Dies Irae part. And that has been quite influential throughout the whole time that the Dies Irae has been used in music. In Mozart, it's kind of the same way. If we look back, especially at this part, you have it going down here and down here again. So you have the rhythm of how something is pronounced in the prayer itself, used in the music itself. You have that the same way in Rachmaninoff's symbolic use of this, or also in Gustav Mahler, which hopefully answers your question to some degree, I hope. Okay, if you have further questions, we can also discuss it at the end if you want. All right, then we move on, and I kind of summarize what kind of information you can use if you have a piece that you don't really know yet. And I think it's quite important to use the title, because it oftentimes, if there is a title that you can work with, if it's not just Etude 25, Well, at the beginning you have this melody that is introduced that is later picked up again, and this melody kind of gives you a soothing impression. I kind of think about sitting at home in my sweater, all nice and warm, and outside snowflakes are coming down, and I look outside and I feel really good. And then winter wind hits you with that really, really fast ascension of notes from the top of the piano. And that is the wind hitting against the window, or even the snow breaking into this nice space that you have created for yourself at home. And I think the title Winter Wind fits so perfectly to the music that I think this is the prime example of why you should use the title in your interpretation of a music piece. But I also have to note that you have to be quite careful, because artists are quite special in how they do things. There's an example by Maurice Ravel. He composed Pavane for a Dead Princess, and when he was asked why he chose that title for his piece, he just said, I like the assonance and the sound of the words in succession to each other, and that's why I named it that way. But then again, later on, people kept pushing him, and they were like, that may be the case, but now that you've thought about the title a bit more, maybe there has been another reason. And then he gave another reason, which was basically that he could also think that the title works in the way that he was kind of thinking of like a little girl in a Velázquez painting dancing this Pavane in this picture, but it's like really gloomy, really melancholic. And yeah, kind of fits the song too, but I'm just pointing out to you that it can at times be quite dangerous to use the title if you have an artist who thinks that he's so special that he can use a title that is just nice because of its assonance. All right, then another general advice is to read up on whatever you can get your hands on about the composer and about the piece. You can oftentimes find pretty good information online or basically everywhere. Also, especially read up about what the composer or the artist says about his own piece, because if you want to know something about art, why not ask the artist who made it himself? I mean, we kind of talked about this last time already, where we said that an artist cannot encapsulate the whole meaning that is put on the canvas after the painting is finished. I think it's quite the same for a music piece. So no artist has this kind of authority over what his music means at the end. But if you look for general direction in your interpretation process, then I think it's not too way off to look into what the artist thought about his own piece. I have another anecdote to this. Debussy wrote about his prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. I'm just going to read this quote out to you. The music of this prelude is a very free illustration of Mallarmé's beautiful poem. By no means does it claim to be a synthesis of it. Rather, there is a succession of scenes through which pass the desires and dreams of the faun in the heat of the afternoon. Then, tired of pursuing the timorous fight of nymphs and naiads, he succumbs to intoxicating sleep, in which he can finally realize his dreams of possession in universal nature. I'm pretty sure if I played you the piece, you would never come up with this interpretation, but I think the point still holds kind of valid. If you don't have this kind of very, very detailed description of what the artist was thinking about in his process. I mean, you can also use the artist's interpretation of his own work or what he was thinking about during the composition process to some degree, but you should obviously not only use that and take the artist's word for granted and then only interpret it in that way. All right, then we move on to the next advice I'll give you, or the next step in your interpretation process, and that is read up on the content and the style of the music piece. A style I chose to illustrate this point is a symphonic poem, which basically means that you have a text and then some composer gets this text into his hands and says, okay, I'm going to use this text as the basis for my composition. That was also the case with the two quotes or the two anecdotes I just gave you, because both of them were based on a poem. This can happen in different kinds of ways. You don't actually need a poem for this. You can also just take a novel, which was the case with Strauss, who took Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche and made a composition out of it. The same happened to Goethe's Faust by Liszt, who composed basically scenes of the book and then published that and played it. And obviously, if you know that the piece in question, the piece you're trying to figure out, has this content, has this background that you can easily get your hands on, that you can easily work with, you should definitely check it out. So if someone plays you a piece and asks you what you think, you should probably maybe look it up and see what you can find. Because oftentimes music pieces actually have content behind them, actually have something they're grounded in, or some kind of basic idea, or even a novel behind them. The same goes for those two pieces by Debussy. They're both based on poems, which is kind of an example for the time of Debussy. It is the time of symbolism in France, and symbolistic poetry is at its peak, basically. And Debussy decides that symbolistic poetry is so beautiful in the way that it is pronounced, in the way that it flows, that he wants to put this into music play. The poems of that time didn't like it at first. There's this anecdote that Paul Valéry reports that Mallarmé, when he was told that Debussy was going to put his poem into music, he was hugely disappointed and thought it was a terrible idea, because basically his poem was so beautiful in language only that he could not grasp his head around how it could be even close to that in music. So, but yeah, in the end, when he first listened to the piece itself played out in the orchestra, he really loved it and basically wrote a letter and basically apologized for his first remark and said that it was one of the most beautiful pieces he had ever listened to. But I guess that's also the fact that his poem was used as the foundation for the piece. All right, now we talk about the formative effort again, because that's kind of keeping this whole lecture together. And the formative effort in music, of course, is quite high, because there's not articulated speech, there's not articulated language that you can work with the same way that you can work with texts, but you can look into the ideas that were used and come up with your own interpretation. That gives you more freedom as the one being or using the information to assemble your own idea of what was used and what was given to you, but it's not as straightforward or clear as in the movie. All right, now the last thing I want to talk about, and then I will hand over to Lucas, is operas. And in opera you have this kind of different situation than in music itself, because in music you only have the music you can listen to, or the score if you look that up, or all the other information I have advised you to look at to work your interpretation out. But in opera, when you sit in the opera house and you watch the performance, you also obviously have the actors on stage doing certain things, and obviously there has been a lot of thought put into their act. So you should also work with that, kind of like in a movie, but I'm not going to talk about movies. He is, so I'll just show you the this clip and then talk a bit about the context of the clip that you can already see from the clip, and use the information that you have in this short clip in comparison to the whole narrative of the opera. Yeah.
Apprivoiser, et c'est bien on va qu'on l'appelle, s'il lui convient de refuser. Et en effet, menace aux prières, l'un parle bien, l'autre se tait. C'est l'autre que je préfère, il n'a rien dit, mais il me plaît. Jamais connu de loi. Si tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime. Si je t'aime, prends garde à toi. Si tu ne m'aimes pas, si tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime. Mais si je t'aime, si je t'aime, prends garde à toi.
Okay, so the woman singing is Carmen, the main character of the opera, obviously. And from what we have seen in the video, we can already deduce that she is really, really important. I mean, the whole attention of the room is fixed on her, with the exception of those three men in uniforms sitting at the table and discussing their business. And that is basically what the whole opera is about. What she sings about is basically that she's not interested in men who are interested in her, and if she loves someone, they actually have to be on their feet, so they have to be really careful in the sense that she is really dangerous. And that is basically what the whole opera is about. I mean, if you work with an opera and try to make sense of it, you can obviously also work with the text, which is always really, really useful and helps you in a lot of ways, but also the music and also the act on stage. And here we can already deduce from this scene the whole plot of what is going to happen. So basically what happens in the rest of the opera, and this is an opening scene, this is the first time that Carmen, the protagonist of the opera, is seen on stage. This is within the first minutes of the whole opera. But basically what happens is that Carmen is interested in one of the three men, not interested in this whole scene, who are just sitting there minding their own business. And she puts the thought into her own head that she wants to have one of those men, which then happens later on. So things happen. She kind of gets one of those men she was interested in, and the moment that this man is also interested in her, she loses all her interest. And that is where this whole conflict then comes from. Yeah, she already hints at this in her text, in basically saying that she's not interested in all the men who are interested in her, only in those that are not interested in her. So she's kind of the chaser type, if I may say so. And that is what happens later in the opera too. So another man appears who is kind of interested in her, but not the full way. So she can't have him at any moment he's not on a leash already. So that is where her attention is focused now. And this man who she was interested in before, she has lost all interest for him. And he basically gives up his occupation after a ploy from her and is basically bound to her and at her mercy. And yeah, what happens basically at the end is that this guy kills her out of revenge because he loves her so much that he cannot be a witness to her being with another man. But she obviously does not have any interest for him anymore, or can't develop this interest anymore because he's interested in her. And that is how the opera ends. All right, now I'm handing over to you.
Okay, so hi from my side. I will be talking about films today, but I want to start with a quick transition, so to say, because you already mentioned the opera, and the opera is already the merging of visuals and music. And since film is a relatively modern phenomenon, I want to recontextualize this and talk about it in a little more modern light, therefore. And this is why I want to talk about the music video real quick, because I want to talk about music videos as a medium I really dislike. I really do not like music videos because, I mean, you already know the song, so why do you need the video for? The video most of the time only sets a mood, only got people dancing around in it and weird settings, and it already takes so much away from the song because it tells you how to feel, it tells you what to picture, the content of the song, like what to picture, the your imagination, or what to let your imagination picture when you listen to the song. So this inner mental landscape that will be evoked by the song is already taken from you. This has to do with the formative effort film demands. And since this is, as you already said, what takes this, or what holds this lecture together, film absolutely got the least formative, demanding art form of any medium of any we're talking about tonight. But before I go more in detail why this is, or what this aspect of film is that takes this formative effort away from you, I want to talk about the general structure of narrative mediums. This is something that applies to everything we have been talking about so far. I just want to make this distinction clear because I'm going to talk about it later in detail, or going to apply it on what I'm going to say. So every narrative medium, the content of every narrative medium can be divided into, sorry, those are French terms, history and discourse. The history is basically the succession of events, so what actually happens, just the chronology of the story, basically. But this is not what you see when you look at the film or read a text, because what you actually see is the discourse, or discourse, if you want. Because my French is horrible, I apologize. And this discourse is the specific medial representation. This is what you are presented with. This is what the book says, what the film says, what the song says. And now understanding a medium, really understanding what this medium is about, and decrypting the medium, as we called it last week, is basically to reconstruct the history from the discourse. So reconstruct what actually is happening by what is given to you by the medium. And this is the tricky part. And to approach this, or to adapt this to film as a medium, I think the best way to approach film as a medium is the picture. And we were talking about figurative art, visual art last week, and this is one of the slides of last week out of William's presentation. And he basically gave those guidelines to dissecting a picture. So to extract the narrative from a picture, you can ask yourself those questions and therefore really find out what's depicted, what the picture is about. So you ask yourself, who is it? What is actually happening? What's the atmosphere? What's the mood? And the core of this is retell the story. Since narratives are actually stories, you have to retell what's happening in the picture to you in order to understand what's going on. I mean, here we have the angels coming down from the sky and telling Mary that she's pregnant with God's son, with Jesus. And this is, I mean, you have to do what I basically did. You have to recall what's going on in this picture in order to understand it. But film actually does that for you. I mean, film is already in succession. Film is already many temporal units, one after another, actually telling the story. You have to retell yourself to understand the image. Film does that. Film already creates narrative meaning by showing to you what is happening, by having animate movements, by letting people speak. You are not the one giving life to the image. The image is already alive. Filmmaker, okay, you really can't see the picture in the background. There was a picture of Andrei Tarkovsky in the background, which you can't see. Nice guy, nice mustache. And he says about film that film is a mosaic with time. Or made with time, which is actually that. So you have the succession of events, that the animate succession of events, the image that came to life that makes the narrative. But this does not mean that film like surpasses the reconstruction of the history through discourse. This is not the thing that makes film less formatively demanding. The thing that makes film less formatively demanding is the fact that film is alive, that you are not the person giving life to the image, giving life to the narrative. I mean, as William said, if you read a book, you have to give the characters faces, you have to imagine the characters' voices, you have to imagine what it feels like to be in a certain situation. The quality of the narrative itself, it just comes from you, and you build it with the building blocks you already have available by perceiving the world. And so you make up your narrative by that. Or even a picture, it can tell you what things look like, but you are the one letting the characters speak. But I will talk about that in a second, because everybody's favorite example. I mean, if you have read Harry Potter and were alive in the last few years, you will know Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter. Or you will know Harry Potter as Daniel Radcliffe. So every time you read Harry Potter, you will see Daniel Radcliffe. The thing is, if you turn that around, a phrase or an utterance you often hear when somebody watched a literary adaptation, like a movie adaptation of a book, I didn't like that. I didn't picture it to be like that. I mean, people are gonna say that, and this is because they construct their own world within their heads when reading the book. But when you watch the movie, everything is fleshed out. You get a fleshed out piece of reality for you that shows you what Harry Potter looks like, what Harry Potter sounds like, what Harry Potter is like. Because you don't have those blanks between the lines you have to fill up with your own imagination. Same with pictures. Pictures can do the same thing. I mean, here, now we know what God looks like. Now, what happened? Now we know what Adam looks like. But still, this is not the same, because those figures are not animate. We make them alive by looking at them and imagining what is going on. Okay, Adam is being created by God, and God is contacting Adam. I don't know. Maybe you know more about that picture than I do. But still, you have to create the narrative surrounding that picture. And because film already does this, film gives you this fully fleshed version of reality, gives you this basically parallel reality on a screen. It's everything there. Everything, how you perceive the world, your sensory perception of the world is depicted and realized within this movie or within this film. And because film, so to say, does not have to bother with creating or with leading you to create your own reality, film can do pretty amazing things with this, with conception of reality. What can be depicted really nice in this sequence. I mean, I'm not going to show you a sequence. I'm just going to show you this screenshot. So, what do you think? What does this person feel like? I mean, what does it look like? Any ideas? Surprise? You can't really tell, right? I mean, she could be scared. She could be a teacher. I mean, a teacher just right before breakup, screaming at somebody in anger, right before cracking up and running out of the classroom crying. I don't know. And you really cannot tell because she is basically totally expressionless, apart from a few little details. But the thing is, in the movie, this is the second sequence. And the first sequence shows her giving birth to her daughter and her daughter dying of early age cancer. So when you then see her walking through this, I think it's university halls in total apathy, totally expressionless, you interpret this as grief, but only because of what you saw beforehand. And in the end of the movie, it turns out that the sequence of her daughter dying actually takes place after the entire movie. So it's the end of the movie, and she, in this sequence, is basically just bored to death. This is everything. And so I think this, what movies can do by anticipating or by making us things anticipate through the sequence, like for example text can do, combined with the visual representation of things, and with our imagination not being really demanded to work, but giving us building blocks we can then interpret, we can then order, as any narrative does. The sequence is the important thing here. We certainly construct things differently. We get different evocations than we get from other media, because everything is there. We are only the interpreters. We don't have to really form and build things. So this is one interesting thing film can do, but another even more important and more interesting thing to me, why I think that film is superior to other medias. I mean, what I said so far was pretty negative, I guess. I mean, you don't have to think at all, and the movie does it all for you, right? I really think that movies, in fact, or film, in fact, as a medium, is superior to other mediums because of this, because it takes this effort away from you and creates you this fully fleshed reality, and not just out of sequential narrative reasons like we saw here, because this is a pretty neat trick to trick the audience in believing things and forming characters and breaking with that anticipation and stuff. But another thing is the multimediality of films. Films, they draw from different channels of medial conveyance. I mean, in films we have the visual representation, we have the sequence, we have music, we have sound, we have dialogue. And with music, this scene is actually also dubbed with sad piano music. So our impression of her being sad even gets amplified. And this is a strength of film. Film can speak to us on different levels. Speaking of speaking, also the representation of dialogues in film is incredibly unique, because being a direct reproduction of reality, if you want so, really is the only way to realistically portray dialogue. I mean, we have people speaking at the same time. We have people where the body language contradicts what they're actually saying, and this is really hard to pull off in other media. I mean, if you write a book and have people interrupt each other, it looks and sounds really weird, and it doesn't feel genuinely real. I mean, there is still a lot of effort to be put into by the reader to make it feel real. Yeah, I think that's most important point. I almost forgot. When you get a reality, when you think back to the person complaining that he or she did not picture that scene to be like that, this actually is not such a negative thing as you may believe, because I think what does that say? If a person sees something she did not expect, or did not expect to see it like that, it actually tells you saw something you could not come up with yourself. You enter the perception of another person. You see something substantially new that could not come from your imagination. And I think this is something amazing. You could even go as far and say that this is a form of intersubjectivity, seeing the world through the eyes of another person. Like the vision or the imagination of another person came to life on the screen in this perfect, so to say, perfect replication of reality. I mean, it's funny because in French, the director is called réalisateur, and this is pretty obvious and amazing, because this is what film is. Film is a realization of imagination and of vision, and therefore I think film is a pretty interesting medium. The next step, because I think now I made my point clear that I really like movies, and I actually also like music videos. I mean, I don't like every music video, and I really dislike those music videos that really add nothing to the actual song, to the actual piece of music. But there are exceptions. There are exceptions really making use of this multimodal conveyance that films offer. Those different modes of transporting narrative, transporting meaning that films are capable of. And my example for this, I bet everybody of you saw that, is This Is America by Childish Gambino. So let's just enjoy it real quick.
We just wanna party, party just for you. We just wanna party, party just for you. I don't wanna die, party just for you. We gotta dance, dance and shake and break. We just wanna party, party just for you. We just wanna party, party just for you. I don't wanna die, party just for you.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Look how I'm living now. Police be tripping now. Yeah, this is America. Guns in my area. I got the strap. I gotta carry 'em. Yeah, I'ma go into this. Yeah, this is gorilla. Yeah, I'ma go get the bag. Yeah, or I'ma get the pad. Yeah, I'm so cold like yeah. I'm so dull like yeah. We gon' blow like yeah. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. Look how I'm geeking now. I'm so fitted. I'm on Gucci. I'm so pretty. I'm gonna get it. Watch me move. This is Sally. That's a tool. On my Kodak, black, ooh, know that, ooh, get it, ooh, work it, 100 bands, 100 bands, 100 bands, contraband, I got the plug on who a hawker, whoa, they gonna find you like Baka, blah.
America, I just checked my follow and listen. You motherfuckers owe me.
Get your money, black man. Black man. Get your money, black man. Black man. Get your money, black man. Black man. Get your money, black man. Black man.
Get down.
Hey, this is black man in this world, living expensive foreign day. Just a big dog, yeah. My Kindle came in the backyard. From a barbarian life to a dog.
Okay, nice every time. Get you a second. Yeah, I just want to do now a really brief and quick and superficial analysis of the video, and to really highlight some points where you really can see the interplay of different channels of conveyance and how this adds up to one really great product of incredible depth. Oh. Yeah, so the beginning is pretty exemplary because it starts with this guy playing his guitar, and Gambino is just standing in the background. It's just this empty warehouse, not much going on. Also, the music is pretty mellow, pretty settled, nice, joyful music. A choir singing, this guitar playing. Yeah, so it's pretty peaceful, actually. You could also draw some religious connotation with a gospel choir singing and things like that. The juxtaposition or contradiction to that are Gambino's lyrics, because he sings about partying and money and having fun and dancing around and stuff like that, and it really does not add up to the general atmosphere. And then he suddenly starts dancing when the beat kicks in, like only the drums. And he starts dancing and making his goofy, totally exaggerated faces, and suddenly the focus of the camera, center of attention, moves towards him. Like suddenly he's the center of attention and everything is surrounding him and the camera is following him as he approaches the man, and then he shoots the man dead. And basically at that point he also kills the music, because then this totally nauseatingly heavy bottom trap beat sets in, and I don't know, it really is a harsh change of mood and a harsh cut in the song. And yes, this is somewhat the music or the musical underlay setting the mood of the song, and what this change does. I mean, it only gets really clear if you start to dig deeper and look for the underlying macro narrative that holds the song together. And that really gets clear if you look at this, because the pose Gambino is in when shooting the man, it resembles Jim Crow. And Jim Crow is from the 19th century. It's a theatrical figure that was played by white actors, or white actors personified black characters that just were there to perpetuate black stereotypes and disrupt the black communities and the black culture at that time. So to really paint a negative image of black people, and basically Gambino kills a man in that pose. So basically Gambino portrays black stereotypes in that scene, and he kills off the traditional music, like a more traditional music. If you follow the religious gospel connotation of the choir, he kills off that traditional part of black culture in that pose as a racial stereotype, and then suddenly this trap beat sets in. So there are many different layers of meaning. It also depends how you focalize. I mean, you could see Gambino as the racial stereotype that is self-destructive, the racial stereotype that actually attacks his own culture by carrying out those stereotypes. And so it's a self-destructive mechanism, so to say. You could say. I mean, it's a really deep scene to analyze, because you could also see this as a attack of American perception of black people on racial stereotypes, on black culture, and interpret it in many different ways. Either way, there is a part of black culture killed. And this is the underlying narrative that goes through the whole song. The problem for black culture. So that black culture is in a sort of crisis, killing off their traditions and replacing them with this stereotypical types that are carried out by modern music, by modern rap music, modern hip hop. And this gets really clear when you look at the lyrics. He starts to sing when the beat breaks down, when the trap beat breaks down. And I think the most interesting thing here are the ad-libs at the end, or all those classic trap ad-libs he actually edited out of the songs of famous rap singers. I think some of them are even featured on the song. And this just shows, okay, this traditional music, the acoustic guitar, the choir gets replaced by people doing absolute weird and completely senseless noises in their music, and you see this juxtaposition of musical styles. Another thing I find particularly interesting that can only be conveyed by the film in combination with the music, because you got this this harsh change in music and the metaphor of somebody actually killing someone, and then you got the weapons that are handed to a kid with a red cloth. There are several interpretations of that out there. One of them, the most dominant one, is to classify this act of killing as a sacrifice towards black culture, but I don't know about that. The thing I see here primarily is, I don't know, someone taking the cloth and wiping the weapon down. Wiping the weapon down to plant it at a crime scene and to make someone else responsible for the crime, not the actual killer, and taking it to the black culture problematization is, an approach to that might be to say, okay, this is a self-destructive mechanism, but they want to frame someone else for that. They want to hold someone else responsible for killing off that cultural goods, those cultural traits. And I find this is an incredible controversial statement, which makes the song so interesting. Another thing also where the song, like the song as the music piece and the visuals play together is with this whole focalization on Childish Gambino in the middle. It's always Childish Gambino is always the center of attention for a few exceptions. And he's always surrounded by a crowd of dancing people, which can be seen as this classical interpretation that, okay, we have the entertainers that make those great hymnic songs, and it only is there to distract us from what's actually going on, because in the background there's chaos, there's total riots going on, people dying here and there, and cars on fire, policemen like hunting down black people that are running for their lives. And then there's this little detail, excuse my editing skills. I just put that from YouTube, and our internet connection wasn't that good, so it's pretty bad. But believe me, those are two chickens. Those are two chickens eating from the ground together, not giving a crap what's going on around them. A brown and a white chicken just eating together, and around them humans of different color are chasing each other down. And I think this is a pretty interesting picture in this whole conglomerate of motives and symbols, because I mean, you could also just sit down and have dinner together. I see this as the core message of the song, to really join people together and see, I don't know, really put those things that are going wrong into the center of attention and try to settle them. Yeah, this might be too optimistic, but you look like you want to reject that statement.
Just hilarious. I mean, the chicken are there for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, but come on. It's prominent.
I mean, it's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Moving on to another symbol where I think the video adds an incredible amount of meaning to the song, to the music and the lyrics, is this scene where the horse rides through the fame. And I mean, everybody just was ranting, yes, this is the white horse of apocalypse, the horseman bringing hell to earth. And you could see it like that, because if you take a look at the lyrics, earlier he goes on like Gucci and all this materialistic stuff, and there is this song Gucci Gang. The chorus is just Gucci, 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 or Gucci Gang, and that's it. And then a few seconds later, he starts rapping, and he mimics the style of rapping and saying 100 bands, 100 bands, 100 bands. And he's basically adopting that, and he does that after the horse enters the scene. So basically, there is the apocalypse coming in form of this absolutely non-scenic type of rapping. And interestingly, after the horse crossed the frame, the main part of the song ends. So the music stops. It's everything gone. Everything went to hell. I think this is pretty strong imagery that also only works when you combine lyrics, when you combine the music and the context of the music and the visuals. And I think this is one of the strongest moments of the video. Another strong moment is this one, because there I think the interplay between lyrics and actual visuals are pretty clear here. Because the line to that shot is, "This is a Sally, that's a tool." Of course, you could say, yeah, Sallies, those cell phones, they're a tool to record stuff, they're a tool for our culture, for our society. Nobody can go without his smartphone. But also, this whole scenery resembles, I don't know, with the balcony and stuff like that, it really resembles for me a prison, like a cell block. And being in the context of suppression and racism, you could say, okay, yeah, it's a Sally. The cell blocks are a tool of suppression, when taking into consideration that the majority of imprisoned people are black. So this is, again, some conspiracy illusion, if you want, like that, and I would not call it a conspiracy. But yeah, this is something where the double meaning of the lyrics gets again portrayed and reproduced by the visuals, and I found this really interesting to see it go like that. The last thing I want to talk about is the choir, but I don't want to talk about the choir because of the allusion to this Charleston church shooting, because in my opinion it's just a different context for the message of the first murder. I mean, he also kills a part of culture, and it's racially motivated. The really interesting thing about this scene is the guy in the middle, because this guy is Jordan Peele, and Jordan Peele is the director of Get Out, a horror movie that basically plays with the setting, or plays with the horror of extreme racism. So there is really a horror story constructed around an extreme case of racism and white supremacy, and I love this weather. So this is really interesting because Redbone was actually the title track, the opening song for the film, and the ending sequence of the video resembles this whole manhunt portrayed in Get Out. So it's a direct allusion to that film. It's actually the only fact about illusions in the music video that's officially what do I want to say? Exactly, it's officially verified by Childish Gambino because he refused any comment on the video. Thank you. Yeah, so I think this ending sequence, although it doesn't have that much meaning to the entire song, it really breaks with the narrative and the whole motive of this whole setting, of the apocalyptic and chaotic setting. I find this is pretty interesting. Also, when you consider that in the background of this scene, how's he called? Another rapper sings a parabolish, Young Thug, sings a parabolish story about a dog too big for his backyard where he's held in. And I think this is really interesting considering this little metaphor at the end of this video. And yeah, this was basically everything I had to say about that video, but I think it's just an incredible example of how visuals, lyrics, and music can play together, all joined together by film. Yeah, so that's all I have to say for today. I hope it was interesting. I think we're a little bit over time, but thank you for listening.